we're going to talk about something that certainly never occurred to me and probably has never occurred to most Americans. And that is how our Jim Crow laws might have influenced the Nazis and their own racial policies of the 1930s. And I got to tell you, that's a hard look in the mirror. And that's the explosive topic covered by our first guest. James Q. Whitman is the Ford Foundation Professor of Comparative and Foreign Law at Yale Law School. His subjects are comparative law, criminal law, and legal history. His books include Harsh Justice, The Origins of Reasonable Doubt, The Verdict of Battle, and the book we're going to be discussing today, Hitler's American Model, the United States, and the Making of Nazi Race Law. And he comes to us today from Paris, France. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Professor James Q. Whitman.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome indeed, Professor Whitman. When you released this book, it caused quite a sensation in literary circles, and it was very favorably well reviewed for the most part, because you went into primary historical sources during the Nazi period. You weren't just skimming off commentary about how the early Nazis praised segregation laws in the U.S. Could you present our listeners with the thesis of your book?
Well, to begin with, it's important that listeners should understand that in the early 1930s and really in the early 20th century, the U.S. was the leading racist jurisdiction in the world. That's, of course, partly because racism runs very deep in American society, but it's also because American lawyers were then, as they are now, unusually creative, innovative figures who produced all sorts of, well, from the point of view of racists then, exciting race law. And among those who found it exciting were Nazi lawyers. I've managed to discover quite a bit of evidence of all of this. The most dramatic piece of evidence really comes from a stenographic transcript of a planning meeting for the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, which began, if you can believe it, when the Nazi Minister of Justice presented a memorandum on American law, and it continued with detailed discussion of American law thereafter.
And when Hitler wrote his book, Mein Kampf, he referred to the situation in the U.S., both in terms of Germans immigrating here and the mixed races. What did he say?
Well, he did. There was a great deal of interest in the United States throughout the world, but especially among European right-wingers, of whom Hitler was, of course, one. He actually described the United States in Mein Kampf as the one state that was making progress toward the creation of a healthy race order of the kind that he wanted to create in Germany. You're entirely right that he was interested in the immigration of Germans into the United States and a little bit more broadly in the American scene. What he found exciting about American law in particular was not Jim Crow as such. And it's important to emphasize that because there was more to American race law than Jim Crow. What excited Hitler was American immigration legislation. America had the world's leading model of race-based immigration legislation in the 1920s, and far-right wingers, of whom Hitler was only one, expressed a lot of admiration for that throughout the early 20th century.
Explain this immigration law in terms of its quotas, and how did it pass Congress? Who were the main sponsors?
Oh, gee, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer the second of your questions. You really need to talk to an American specialist in American legal history about that. The way the statutes worked, though, did involve exactly, as you say, quotas, and in particular, quotas on the basis of national origin. Now, these statutes didn't expressly advertise their racist aims. They used the sort of thing that Americans often use, a kind of a legal subterfuge. The subterfuge in this case being, once again, national origin. But there was no secret about what the statutes were intended to achieve. They were intended to maintain, well, although that phrase wasn't used either, white supremacy in the United States. They favored immigrants from Northern European countries, not only, of course, England, but also Germany. And that naturally seemed appealing to Hitler. They were particularly designed to keep out Eastern Europeans, among them Eastern European Jews. In addition, there was other American legislation carefully designed to keep Asian immigration to a minimum.